That's better. Hey, everybody. So it's been a while. I've actually been moving. I got a new job in a new state and in the process of moving over the past month or so. So sort of fallen off the YouTube um, map or planet. Okay, and I'm sort of bebopping around in Airbnbs, and this looks a little more stuffy than what I'm used to, but yeah, it's actually kind of a nice place. Anyways, Conclave. Let's talk about Conclave, the movie. Um, for those of you who have not seen it, I'd recommend watching it first before watching this video, um, and then come back and watch this video because I am going to spoil it. And it's one of those movies that has a couple of things that pop up here and there, and you don't really want to be spoiled on it. So I'd recommend watching the movie first if you haven't seen it. And then it's a good movie; it's worth your time, especially if you're into personality. And the reason is, um, it's one of the rare movies that um, focuses on, I think, the SJ. The SJ, you've got a main character who's an SJ, and maybe it's not that rare, but it's certainly not as popular as it might have used to been, back in, the maybe even before that. Um, and I'm going to walk through that because it's actually you sort of have four SJs: the ESTJ, the ISTJ, the ISFJ, and the ESFJ, all sort of competing with each other. And it's a real interesting movie because it's one of the movies that I like to describe as it's about the movie is about the personality, right? It's about somebody sort of struggling with their personality type and their strengths and their weaknesses kind of thing. And I'll sort of describe that in more detail in a minute here. Um, and the other thing that's interesting about it is it sort of maps on to um, something that the author Malcolm Gladwell came up with. I think he came up with it. You could find it on Joe Rogan's show, and he's talking about different types of crime, thriller types of shows, and how you could break them into what he referred to as a Western, an Eastern, a Northern, or a Southern. And you have real quickly, and it's all about the individual, a character and how they interact with their environment or the system or the institution that they're in. And so you have the Western, where there really is no institution, there is no rule of law, there are no rules and laws in place, and everybody's sort of on their own or sort of living by their own code kind of thing. And so that would be the sort of classic Western where you can't really rely on any sort of given institution that is going to make the rules. And maybe a show like The Wire is sort of close to that. The Wire is kind of all over the place. It does a lot of these different things, but with some characters, it's very Western, like where they don't really have rules, they don't really have an institution, but they kind of have a code that they live by. Very ESTP, ISTP, SP kind of characters, right? Have to sort of live on the edge and live in the moment kind of people. Then you contrast that to what he referred to as the Northern, and the Northern is sort of like Law and Order, where you have a very well-defined institution, and he describes it as like virtually flawless, like it works every time, right? So you watch a Law and Order show, and yeah, they have to do some looking around, but by the end of the episode, 95% of the time they're going to solve the crime, right? The institution, the cops and the lawyers, the prosecutors are going to solve the problem, right? So you can rely on an institution, and the characters all sort of act accordingly, right? And so that's going to be a very SJ type of storyline in types of characters. I mean, I can't think of it, a character out of Law and Order that isn't an SJ unless they're there for like comic relief or something. But they rely on the system, they rely on the rules, they rely on the institution. Very SJ type of behavior. Um, because SJs have that SI, and SI is largely rule based, experience based. We've all done this before. We've all trusted the institution to come up with an answer, and let's just trust the rules. Let's trust the institution. And there's also the socionics part of SI of it makes you feel comfortable, right? And so Gladwell's argument is, you see a lot of women watch shows like Law and Order and these other sort of, police procedurals that would be described as Northerns because it makes them feel comfortable, right? It makes them feel comfortable that, at the end of the day, things are going to go wrong, but at the end of the day, you can sort of trust the institution. I don't know if that's necessarily Gladwell says, women watch him because of that, but I would imagine a lot of SJ guys do too. They might watch something a little bit more edgy, but still, at the end of the day, you can trust the institution, is going to figure it out. Okay, so that's the Northern. The Eastern is you have an individual, you have a character who's in an institution that normally works, but it's somehow been corrupted because of some people, usually people on the inside that have corrupted it, and it's not working in its sort of ideal form, right? Like if you didn't have the corruption, then everything would work. And I think of movies like LA Confidential, where you have a cop in the system that believes in the system, has always believed in the system, and then finds out that you get these sort of rogue bad cops that are actually the real criminals. And the other thing that Gladwell points out about the Eastern is it's usually somebody on the inside that has to do the fixing. So for example, in LA Confidential, it's the rookie cop, right? Who is in the institution, has to sort of fix it and clean it up from the inside. And you compare that, so that's the Eastern. You compare that to the Southern, where the Southern is just the whole institution is bad. It's just sort of rotten to the core. Sort of, I would probably lump Star Wars into this, right? Even though people sort of think of Star Wars as a Western, under this classification system, I'd say it's kind of more like a Southern, where the institution is rotten to the core, and you need somebody from the outside to come in and fix it. And this is, to me, is sort of the classic INFP hero's journey type of story, where Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, where you have sort of the reluctant hero that's brought in, and they've got to basically take on the evil empire, right? And they've got that lead FI that where they have the conviction and the moral turpitude and the ethical framework that is there to save the day. They're fighting the big bad TE machine, right? That just doesn't have a heart and just sort of runs on its own. Maybe a comparison or something worth noting is something like Harry Potter is probably more like an Eastern, because he's sort of on the inside, and to the extent there's something wrong, it's sort of you could trust Hogwarts. Hogwarts is supposed to be a good institution, and the whole wizard, whatever, political system is supposed to be a good institution, and it's sort of corrupted by a few bad apples on the inside. I don't really know Harry Potter that well, so I might be getting it wrong. And there might be some elements where just the whole institution is rotten to the core, and it turns more into like a Southern, especially something where Harry Potter, where you have lots of different books, lots of different stories, lots of different things going on. They might sort of bounce around these different types of stories. Okay. So, Conclave. Let's get back to Conclave because, again, I think this is sort of a true SJ or exploration of the SJ mind. Um, and, you know, and I would throw it into, a northern type of story under the Gladwell system. Again, that's where, the system is virtually flawless and everybody's just sort of going through the process. And you can pretty much trust that, whatever the problem is, whatever the issue is, they're going to find, they're going to trust this institution, they're going to trust the rules, and they're going to get there. Um, and there's no real corruption or real problem. And that's one of the things I liked about Conclave because it wasn't like attacking the church in any particular, like, it wasn't attacking the church as sort of corrupt, down to its core and needs to be gutted out or anything. But it did show how personalities can be challenged within the system. But ultimately, if they just trust the system's going to work. Is sort of the message you get from it. Okay, so here's where it gets a little spoilery. Um, so you've got the Rafe Fiennes character, who I'm going to argue is an ISFJ, and you've got three other characters, and you're introduced to them very early on in the movie. And there's the John Lithgow character, who I think is probably an ESTJ. There's the Rafe Fiennes ISFJ. There's I forget the actor's name. He's from in the character at least is from Africa. I don't know if the actor himself is, but the character's from Africa. And he's your ESFJ, very you know very gregarious, and everybody loves the guy kind of guy. Your typical ESFJ. And then you've got the Stanley Tucci character, who's probably an ISTJ, but because of the plot and everything, he's sort of ISTJ with an INFP bend, very idealistic. But you can kind of think of him as maybe an ISTJ with like a supercharged FI. Um, but it doesn't really matter so much with his character as it does, I think, with the Jeremy Irons character and the other two guys, the guy from Africa and the Lithgow character, the ESTJ, the ESFJ. And why is that? So again, the movie is this exploration mainly of Rafe Fiennes' character um, and basically, whether or not he can trust the system. Um, and again, you start the movie off with the SJs, and the Pope had just died, and the Rafe Fiennes character shows up late, which of course is like the worst thing to an SJ, right? Especially an ISTJ or an ISFJ is showing up late, when people are expecting you. And so he's already sort of discombobulated, right? One of the worst things that could happen to the poor guy. He's late, and not only is he late, but the Pope had already died, and he was trying to get there before the Pope died. And so, he's already starting off behind the eight ball here. And the SJs, they're all cardinals, I should point out. That's going to become important. And they're basically giving the Pope the last rites or praying, for him. And then once they sort of realize, okay, he's dead, they go into pure SJ mode, right? Because now you have to get the conclave, you have to get the new Pope going. And it's this one thing after another, one little one little thing that has to be done after another, after another, after another. And they go into, full SJ mode. And, the first 15 to 20 minutes is just them going completely SJ and trying to figure out, like, what do we do? What do we do? Because obviously, or I'm assuming none of them had been through it before. And so they have to figure out all the rules, right? And it's the Catholic Church, and so the Catholic Church has all these like very defined, here's what you do to select the new pope, right? And nobody can just sort of do it willy-nilly. You have to follow these very traditional, historic, almost ritualistic rules, right? And so you have, of course, these SJs just going full SJ mode. And it isn't until about 15 minutes or so into the movie that this new cardinal that nobody had ever met, shows up. Um, Again, big spoiler here, and because he's new, they ask him, to give the blessing for the dinner they're about to eat. And of course, they're in full SJ mode, trying to get all the cardinals assembled from around the world, trying to get, just all that, the logistics taken care of for the conclave, right? And so this new guy, he gives the little prayer, and they're just like, okay, all right, let's go eat. But then he keeps going. And he starts, talking about bless this and bless that and bless these people and bless those people. And for the first time in the movie, you're surrounded by all these Catholic cardinals and all these religious, nuns and priests and everything. And for the first time in the movie, somebody's actually doing something religious, right? Or acting, for lack of a better word, Christ-like, right? And talking about blessing, various people and being grateful, et cetera, et cetera. And it sort of, you can see, at least in the Ray Fiennes character, he sort of is taken aback and he realizes like, oh, right, that's kind of why we're all here. Um, so then they get back into SJ mode. And of course the new guy is like the INFP, right? He's not obsessed with the SJ logistics of it all. He is looking more for the deeper meaning of it all. And maybe you could argue INFJ, but I'm sticking with INFP on this guy. Okay, so the SJs go about being SJs some more, and again, it's all about logistics. It's about process. And the tone of the movie, at least at the beginning, is very sort of on edge. Like the music, it's very sporadic. It just sort of keeps you on edge and nervous, right? I mean, it really is like you're trying to plan a wedding or or like a party or something, and you're just in full logistics mode. Um, so then you get into sort of the heart of it, and again, Ray Fiennes just he finds himself doubting, and I should mention that the four SJs are sort of thought of as sort of the heir like one of them is probably going to be the next pope. And then there's another guy who sort of comes in and he's sort of your ESTP or ESFP, sort of disrupting the whole system kind of guy, which is ironically, he's disrupting the system, but it's because he's like ultra conservative and wants to go back to, sort of the old way of doing things in the Catholic Church. But he's also very out there, SP, rambunctious. So that was an interesting character. But the four SJs are sort of thought of as like one of them is going to be the next pope. Um, and and so they're all sort of competing with each other, but trying not to compete with each other, right? They're trying to say, it's not about me, it's about what God wants, it's about what the church wants, it's about what the institution wants. And so let's all just trust the institution, and and it'll come to the right result. And Jeremy Irons goes at one point, talks about a conversation that he had with the Pope when the Pope was still alive, about whether or not I keep saying Jeremy Irons, but it's Ray Fiennes. I get the two mixed up. But anyways, um, where Ray Fiennes, his character was sort of like, doubting whether he wanted to be the Pope, and the old Pope, told him, yeah, you're not really a shepherd. You're more of a manager of shepherds, right? Which is exactly what you tell an SJ, right? Where you're not so much like the visionary leader, but you're the guy who's going to manage everybody, you're going to manage the visionary leaders. You're not really the sales guy, but or the creative director or anything like that, but you're going to do a really good job at managing the sales guys and managing the creative director, which was sort of the message that the Pope was sending to Irons and to Ray Fiennes, his character. And so the Ray Fiennes character does end up being sort of in charge of the process. Like he's, the committee chair or whatever. Um, and so he's in charge of the process and of course sort of doubts whether or not he can make the right decisions, et cetera, et cetera. I think he doubts himself a lot because he's TE polar. Um, and he doubts whether or not he can sort of steer the ship in the right way. And, feels sort of uneasy because this is a lot of TE type of stuff, right? But then when it comes down to one-on-one conversations, he's very good. He's very ISFJ. He's very diplomatic. He's very good at listening to people, but he's also very good at sort of setting his foot down and saying, okay, here's the rule. Here's what we're going to do. So it was an interesting, character development for him. And the other thing is, ultimately, all he wants is to know that he can trust the system. He just wants to know that, whatever's going on, they're going to come out with the right decision, whether or not he, knows what the answer is right now, right? Because you're trying to find this answer to this very uncertain and to them, and to lots of other people in the world, one of the most important decisions that they're going to have to make. And, he just doesn't know, if he and all the other cardinals are up to the task, right? Um, so, very much doubting that TE part of the institution, like just trust it, it's going to work, right? Um, and so he's not like fighting against it. He doesn't find it corrupt or evil or bad, in any way. He just doubts it. He doesn't, he, not even does he doubt it, but he's just very uncertain, and, is this going to work? Is this going to work? Is this going to work? Um, but all at the same time, fulfilling his SJ duties and just sort of marching along, right? And I think the more he marches along, the more he realizes, oh, this is working, right? And we are, to put it in Catholic terms, we're sort of being guided by the church or being guided by God's hand here, right? If we just trust the system. Um, and then the other SJs, the ESTJ and the ESFJ, are interesting because they end up, again, they're sort of the front runners. And if you don't know how the conclave works, basically the cardinals vote on who they think should be the pope. And he's got to get a certain number, I think like 72, 74 votes or something. And they just keep voting until somebody wins, until somebody gets 72 votes. And this will go on for days, maybe weeks. And so they start off, and the ESFJ and the ESTJ are sort of in the lead, as people would expect, and this other sort of rambunctious guy is sort of in there too. And then your ISFJ and ISTJ are sort of in the running too. But as the story unfolds, you find out, with, again, spoiler here, spoiler, you find out with the ESFJ, he had a past where he had a relationship with a young woman, and basically the ESFJ led him astray, right? Right? It's sort of the classic, like the whatever your strength, the Greek tragedy, right? Where whatever your strength is, it ends up being your ultimate downfall. So he's very effy, right? And he probably was very effy when he was younger. And so had this sort of secret affair that was coming out. And so he basically gets removed from it because they're just like, yeah, just with your past, there's just no way that the church could sustain this kind of, you know, scandal. And of course the guy's heartbroken. He lived his whole life trying to be the Pope and really thought he had it in the bag, but this one thing from his past kept him from it. And again, it was like his ESFJness, got the best of him. And then the ESTJ, so he gets bounced because they find out that he was the one that sort of uh, set up the getting that information about the ESFJ guy out there, right? So he's the one that sort of leaked the information, and he was being very ESTJ, TE, planning, cunning, straight, try to come up with some sort of scheme, right, to get the other guy bounced and to win. Again, a very ESTJ kind of thing, lead TE type of thing. And then he is also sort of, the victim of his own, personality, right? Where his lead TE is what ultimately ends up being his ruin, right? So his superpower, again, the Greek tragedy, his superpower ends up being his ultimate ruin because he's trying to scheme and do all this TE stuff behind the scenes. And they find out about it and they're like, okay, well, we don't like that either, right? And so he sort of gets bounced. And you can imagine where this ultimately ends up. I won't give away too much, but ultimately the INFP ends up coming in and saving the day, right? Like the Christ-like character, and everybody realizes like, oh, right, yeah, maybe we are just better at managing things than actually, being the shepherd, right? Maybe you need somebody with a different type of personality that isn't so focused on logistics and running the institution and running, keeping the trains running and the lights on, but somebody who understands sort of the core values of it and expresses those core values. And so of course they find somebody with that personality, right? And the SJs all kind of, I think in the end, realize that they are good at managing the shepherds in the system and keeping the trains running and keeping the logistics going. But at the end of the day, their personality is not to be the Pope, to be the lead shepherd, right? That just takes a different type of personality. And, of course, they're not saying any of this in the movie, but it's the message, right, that you get from it. So real good movie, real good exploration of, a personality type or types that you don't get a whole lot, right? And they weren't bagging on SJs. They weren't like trying to say that the system is corrupt and if you're an ESTJ, then you're rotten to the core or anything like that. It was really sort of the opposite of we have this system in place. We have these people that we need to run the system, who understand the system, who understand the rules, that feel comfortable with the rules, that are going to, at the end of the day, trust the rules and keep the institution going, even if they ultimately aren't the Pope, right? Even if they aren't ultimately the visionary, they still have this very important role in the institution. um and very law and order, very just sort of makes you feel comfortable with the state of the world. So all you SJs out there, I'm sure you'll love the movie. Well, hopefully you've already seen it. And hopefully this, gives you some things to think about. Okay. Talk to everybody later. If you've got any recommendations on other movies where it's sort of like this, where the personality is driving the movie. So things like Wicked, Star Wars, where your INFPs driving the movie or the plot, but I'd be interested in other types of movies, not necessarily the INFP or the SJs because we've already talked about those. Um, there's probably some NT stuff out there, stuff like The Martian. A lot of sci-fi is going to be very NT driven. Um, so be interested, see what people think. All right, talk to you later. Bye.